You know those moments in your own life that just completely baffle you?
I mean, we all have them.
Right. Like you might be driving to work and out of nowhere you suddenly feel this crushing wave of sadness, or you're having a perfectly normal dinner with your partner and you inexplicably pick a vicious fight over like how the napkins are folded.
Yeah, the napkin fights. It's never actually about the napkins.
Exactly. But we all walk around with this comforting everyday assumption that we are, completely transparent to ourselves.
We really do. It's an incredibly reassuring narrative to tell ourselves.
It is. We like to imagine that our internal life is this mild, well-lit drawing room comedy, and we're the rational directors of every single scene.
Because the idea that we are the conscious authors of every thought, every career choice, and every sudden mood swing, it gives us a sense of control in a really chaotic world.
But what if you aren't the director at all?
Well, that's the scary part.
Right. What if, instead of a light comedy, you are actually a character in a dark, wild, poetic drama, and you are completely oblivious to the real script you're following?
That is a very unsettling thought for most people.
It really is. Welcome to today's deep dive. We are exploring the terrifying and, frankly, fascinating plumbing of human motivation. And we're using Michael Kahn's brilliant book, Basic Freud.
It's such a great book.
It is. Our mission today is to rescue Sigmund Freud from the dusty, outdated academic shelves. We are bypassing all the pop culture cliches to show you how his actual theories, despite all the controversies, remain these unmatched, incredible tools for understanding your own most bizarre behaviors and hidden motivations.
Yeah, because it has become quite fashionable in certain circles to dismiss Freud entirely.
Oh, totally. Like, oh, he's just the cigar guy.
Exactly. People wave him away and say modern neuroscience or cognitive behavioral therapy has made him completely irrelevant. But when you look past the caricatures and examine the actual architecture of the mind he proposed, it provides a profoundly useful lens.
Which is exactly what we're going to do. Today, we're not just cataloging the weird things humans do, we're going deep into the subterranean reasons why we do them.
Right. The invisible machinery.
Okay, let's unpack this. To understand why we sabotage our own success or harbor these weird, inexplicable fears, we first have to map the territory of the mind itself.
And that map is not what we think it is.
Not at all. The core Freudian concept we have to swallow is pretty brutal. We simply do not know why we feel, fear, think, or do what we do.
The conscious mind is largely in the dark.
Yeah, Kahn shares a striking example from Freud's own early lectures that perfectly sets this up. There was this young bride, just back from her honeymoon.
Right, the honeymoon story.
Yeah. She is walking down the street with her sister, and she sees her brand new husband on the other side of the street.
Okay.
She nudges her sister and accidentally says, "Look, there goes Harel."
Using his formal, polite name.
Exactly, like he was a complete stranger she just recognized from the bank or something.
Yeah, she had entirely forgotten in that brief fraction of a second that this man had been her husband for weeks.
Wow.
Freud heard this anecdote and immediately understood the chilling inference. Consciously, this woman was playing the role of the happy, devoted new bride.
Because that's what society accepts.
Exactly. But unconsciously, she already knew the marriage was a catastrophic mistake. She was trying to distance herself from him.
Just by using the formal name?
Yes. And historically, that marriage did eventually end in disaster.
So her conscious brain thinks, happy bride, but her unconscious brain is screaming, this is a mistake.
Yeah.
How do those two conflicting realities exist in the same head without the person just, short-circuiting? What does the plumbing of that actually look like?
Well, Freud pictured the mind not as a single unified space where everything is accessible, but as a divided structure.
Oh.
He used this brilliant architectural metaphor. Imagine a massive, dark, incredibly crowded entrance hall.
Like a huge waiting room.
A huge, chaotic waiting room. This represents the unconscious. It is absolutely packed to the ceiling with our deepest impulses, our rawest wishes, and our oldest, most primitive fears.
Just bumping into each other in the dark.
Exactly. Now, this enormous entrance hall opens up into a much smaller, well-lit drawing room, which represents our conscious mind.
So the part of you that is listening to this deep dive right now.
Right. But the impulses in the entrance hall cannot just stroll into the drawing room whenever they feel like it.
Because there's a barrier. I'm picturing the watchman that Freud describes standing in the doorway between the two rooms, like a remarkably strict bouncer at an exclusive VIP club.
That's exactly it, a mental bouncer.
Right. His entire job is to look at every single impulse, memory, or wish trying to get into consciousness and ask, is this going to cause the boss anxiety, fear, or guilt?
And if the answer is yes,
The bouncer violently tosses the impulse back into the dark entrance hall. That is the literal act of repression.
that bouncer analogy works perfectly because it highlights the force required to keep things hidden. And what's fascinating here is how entirely different the rules of reality are in these two spaces.
How so?
Well, the drawing room of consciousness operates on what Freud called secondary process and the reality principle.
Okay, big terms. What do they mean?
It basically uses logic. It understands cause and effect. And crucially, it knows how to delay gratification. If you are hungry during a meeting, the drawing room knows to wait until the meeting is over to eat.
But the entrance hall is just pure chaos, isn't it?
Total chaos. The entrance hall operates on primary process logic and the pleasure principle. In this dark room, there is no concept of time whatsoever.
Wait, no time at all.
None. A terrifying vulnerability you felt when you were 4 years old is just as fresh, urgent, and terrifying today as it was decades ago.
Oh, wow. That explains a lot.
Right. There is no contradiction allowed either. You can passionately love and violently hate the exact same person simultaneously without any cognitive dissonance.
Because logic doesn't exist there.
Exactly. Under the pleasure principle, the demand is always, I want it now, and I don't care about the consequences. Furthermore, in this primary process space, a wish is treated as if it were actual material reality.
Hold on, I'm trying to wrap my head around the mechanics here. If this bouncer, the watchman, is actually doing his job and vigorously keeping all this chaotic, contradictory stuff repressed in the dark, how do we ever know what's hiding in the entrance hall?
Right. How do we get a peek?
Yeah. How did Freud figure it out?
Because the bouncer is overworked and simply isn't perfect, impulses that are kept under high pressure inevitably find a way to leak out.
They slip past him.
They slip past the watchman, usually by wearing clever disguises. One of the most common leakage points is what Freud called parapraxis.
Which is a fancy word for...
Slips of the tongue.
Right.
Bungled actions. Or those inexplicable memory lapses where you suddenly forget a word you know perfectly well.
Yes. Kahn details this absolutely wild story from Freud's psychopathology of everyday life that illustrates this. Freud is on a train, right?
Right, talking to a young man.
Yeah, an ambitious young man who is complaining bitterly about his life in his generation. And to make his point, the young man tries to quote a famous line of Latin poetry from Virgil.
Which roughly translates to, let someone arise from my bones as an avenger.
Exactly. But he completely blanks on the Latin word for someone, the word aliquis.
You just cannot remember it.
It's driving him crazy. He knows the poem. Freud, being Freud, decides to play detective. He has the young man free associate on the missing word aliquis.
And the chain of association is a masterpiece of unconscious engineering.
It really is.
The man's brain jumps from the forgotten word aliquis to relics to liquefying to fluidity to the miracle of St. Januarius in Naples.
Where the saint's dried blood miraculously liquefies on a specific holy day.
Exactly.
And Freud asks him, what happens if the blood doesn't liquefy? The young man says that people get terribly upset. It's a huge crisis.
And then what happens?
Suddenly, the young man just stops cold. He gets deeply embarrassed. He realizes he's been carrying around this sheer unspoken terror that his girlfriend has missed her period.
It's incredible. It demonstrates the sheer poetic ingenuity of the unconscious mind. His conscious intention was to angrily ask for a descendant, an avenger from his bones.
Right.
But his unconscious mind screamed, a descendant is the absolute last thing we want right now.
So the bouncer violently blocked the word aliquis because the unconscious knew it was phonetically and symbolically linked to blood, liquefying, and this deeply repressed terror about the missed period.
Exactly. It just scrubbed the word from his memory to save him from the panic.
That is just incredible. The unconscious mind doing linguistic gymnastics just to avoid a feeling of panic. But that begs a massive question.
Which is?
How does the entrance hall get filled with all these incredibly specific, timeless fears and wishes to begin with? Where does the code come from?
Childhood.
Yeah, Kahn explains that these patterns are essentially written into our operating system during early childhood development. He uses this fantastic analogy of a migrating tribe.
It's a great visual. As we grow through childhood, we move through distinct psychosexual stages of development. Imagine human development as a migrating tribe moving across a vast, challenging landscape.
Like a huge expedition.
Right. At each stage of the journey, the tribe leaves a detachment of troops behind to hold the territory and build settlements.
Okay, making camp.
Now, if the tribe moves forward into new territory and suddenly hits a difficult challenge, a famine or a terrifying enemy, what do?
They retreat.
They retreat back to the most heavily fortified settlement, the place where they left the most troops.
In Freudian terms, that's fixation and regression. If you have a really traumatic or overly indulgent time at a certain stage of your childhood, you leave a ton of psychological troops there. You fixate.
Yes.
And decades later, when your boss yells at you or romantic relationship gets impossibly hard, your psyche can't handle the frontline battle, so you regress. You retreat to that exact childhood stage to cope.
And those stages literally dictate our adult organizing principles. Take the oral stage, the very first period of human life.
Right, baby's just eating and crying.
An infant's entire universe is experienced through taking in nourishment. How the caregivers respond during this stage writes permanent foundational code.
So it's not just about food.
No, think about an infant fed strictly on a rigid schedule, left to cry in the dark for hours simply because the clock says it isn't feeding time yet.
Oh, that's heartbreaking.
It is. That infant learns a brutal, unconscious organizing principle. The world is indifferent, I'm helpless, and my needs do not matter. They wire for lifelong pessimism.
Wow.
Conversely, an infant fed on demand wires for a baseline optimism about the universe.
And then the migrating tribe moves to the anal stage around year 2. Kahn points out this is really the first time the child realizes their own physical desires violently conflict with society's rules.
Terrible twos.
Exactly. Toilet training is the ultimate battle of wills between child and parent.
Yeah.
If the parents are incredibly strict, shaming, and severe during this phase, the child learns that to avoid terror and loss of love, everything in life must be perfectly rigidly controlled.
Yes.
So you develop a lifelong organizing principle of compulsiveness, stubbornness, or extreme parsimony.
Which perfectly explains the everyday behavior of someone who copes with an impending, terrifying deadline at work by suddenly needing to meticulously clean and organize their entire apartment.
Oh, I've definitely done that.
We all have. The stress of the modern workplace forces a regression. They retreat to a stage where controlling physical mess was the only way to appease giant, angry gods and feel safe.
If you've ever wondered why you do things that actively harm you, this directly connects to one of the most baffling concepts Kahn explores: the repetition compulsion.
Yes, repeating the pain.
Why do we constantly repeat our own misery? He shares the clinical case of Caroline. She constantly chose to date men with severe drug and alcohol problems.
Over and over.
Over and over. Consciously, she told herself she was just unlucky in love, just a magnet for bad guys. But in therapy, the real script emerged. She was unconsciously replaying her childhood role as the desperate caretaker to her deeply unhappy, troubled older brother.
This specific phenomenon was a massive, frustrating revelation for Freud. Because on the surface, it directly defies the pleasure principle.
Wait, I'm stuck on exactly that. If the primary rule of the unconscious entrance hall is I want pleasure and instant gratification right now, Caroline's behavior makes zero sense. She is actively, repeatedly choosing misery and heartbreak.
It seems like a contradiction until you look at the hidden motive. Freud realized that we repeat these painful scenarios as an unconscious, desperate attempt to remaster an old trauma.
To fix it.
Exactly. Caroline was setting up the exact same terrible play from her childhood, casting new men in the role of her brother, hoping that this time she could rewrite the script and force a happy ending.
She was trying to retroactively save her brother by saving these boyfriends.
Yes.
But the tragic part is the happy ending never comes. Kahn notes that if one of Caroline's boyfriends actually got clean and sober, she immediately lost interest and broke up with him.
Because the script was ruined.
Right. He wasn't her brother anymore, so the unconscious drive to remaster the trauma completely vanished.
Freud ultimately speculated that this repetition compulsion was so powerful and so divorced from pleasure that it pointed to a darker regressive force in the human psyche.
The death instinct.
Yes. He theorized a death instinct, an unconscious drive to return to a prior state of inorganic stillness, a force that constantly battles against eros, our life-affirming instinct. It's a gravitational pullback into our oldest, deepest wounds.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Speaking of our oldest wounds and the childhood imprints that dictate our adult lives, we have to tackle the elephant in the room.
Yes.
The most powerful, universal, and definitely the most controversial imprint of all. The Oedipus complex. Kahn asks us to look at Shakespeare's Hamlet. Why does Hamlet hesitate for 5 agonizing acts to kill his uncle King Claudius?
It's the great literary mystery.
Right. The uncle murdered Hamlet's father and married his mother. By the rules of the era, he should just walk in and take revenge. But he is completely paralyzed.
Freud's reading of Hamlet is profound because it shifts the mystery from external politics to internal horror.
How so?
Hamlet hesitates because his uncle has actually carried out Hamlet's own deepest, most violently repressed childhood wish to remove his father and have his mother all to himself.
Oh, wow.
To kill his uncle would be to punish a man for doing exactly what Hamlet's own unconscious desired. The crushing internal guilt is what paralyzes him, not a lack of physical courage.
I look at this and think, Freud was writing in Victorian Vienna. This sounds like a byproduct of a very specific, repressed patriarchal society.
Yeah.
Is there any actual evidence that this intense, incestuous rivalry narrative applies universally? Does this apply to people across completely different cultures?
It is the single most common critique of psychoanalysis. People assume it's a localized Victorian neurosis. But Kahn points to a massive cross-cultural study by anthropologist Alan Johnson and psychiatrist Douglas Price Williams.
What did they do?
They systematically analyze folktales and myths from all over the globe, across entirely different social structures, from highly stratified modern societies to remote, egalitarian, non-patriarchal tribes.
And what did they find?
They found the Oedipal narrative is absolutely ubiquitous. The core motif of a child struggling to replace or defeat the same-sex parent in order to possess the opposite-sex parent appears in the folklore of almost every human culture on Earth.
Really? Everywhere?
Everywhere. In fact, in many non-Western societies where sexual repression isn't as intensely formalized as Victorian Europe, the tales are often much more explicit and bloody regarding the sexual and aggressive elements. It is an unavoidable hurdle of human development.
So it's baked into the human condition. And Kahn points out that how parents handle this delicate phase can literally make or break a child's entire future.
Yes.
He details the terrifying danger of what happens when a child actually wins, becoming the Oedipal victor. He shares the case of a patient named Jeffrey.
A very difficult case.
Jeffrey's parents divorced when he was 10, and his father moved away. His mother never dated again and started treating Jeffrey like her little man, using him as her primary emotional support.
Blurring the boundaries.
Massively. As a young teenager, Jeffrey would masturbate and leave his ejaculate on his bed sheets, making absolutely no attempt to hide it. Every single morning, his mother would wash the sheets and replace them without saying a single word to him about it.
It is a profoundly chilling clinical picture of boundary collapse. Jeffrey later told his therapist, "We were actually making love, weren't we?"
That's dark. Yes. By remaining silent and treating him as the man of the house, his mother had essentially vacated the role of the parent, allowed him to win the Oedipal competition. He vanquished the father and claimed the mother. But Kahn explains that winning this competition is a psychological catastrophe.
It is a catastrophe because, remember the rules of the entrance hall. In the primary process of the unconscious, the wish is the exact same thing as the act.
Oh, right. No distinction.
None. By winning this dynamic, Jeffrey's unconscious mind truly believed he had successfully driven his father into exile and committed literal psychic incest with his mother.
The guilt must have been unbearable.
The internal guilt was absolute and crushing. When he eventually grew up and got married, he was completely paralyzed. He was entirely unable to be sexually intimate with his own wife.
Because to his unconscious mind, to be physically intimate with a woman felt like a horrific betrayal of his mother, and it triggered that massive repressed guilt. Kahn points out that this underlying dynamic leads to a tragic reality for so many adults walking around today.
The tenderness-passion split.
Yes, often referred to historically as the Madonna whore complex. Because the universal incest taboo is so intensely strong, many people are forced to defensively separate their feelings.
How does that work in practice?
Well, they find a wonderful partner who resembles their parent in some comforting way, whom they feel immense, tender, affectionate love for. But the unconscious bouncer steps in and says, "Alert, you cannot feel raw sexual passion for this person because that feels too close to violating the taboo."
So their desires get cleaved in half. They can only feel intense sexual passion for people they do not tenderly love or people they deem socially inappropriate or dangerous.
It's a devastating, invisible barrier to having a whole, integrated, deeply fulfilling romantic relationship.
Exactly. And this brings us to a crucial mechanical question. It's all of these incredibly intense desires, Oedipal urges, violent, aggressive drives, bizarre primary process wishes are constantly bubbling up under the surface trying to get into the drawing room. How does the mind actually warn us?
Kahn explains it's through anxiety, and we fight back through defense mechanisms. But the definition of anxiety here is fascinating.
This represented a massive evolution in Freud's own thinking. Initially, early in his career, he thought that repressed energy simply turned into anxiety, like steam building up in a kettle.
Just pressure.
Right. But his brilliant second theory reversed that causality completely. Anxiety doesn't come from repression. Anxiety is a signal that causes repression.
It's the alarm bell.
It is the ego's internal alarm bell. It signals the anticipation of helplessness in the face of an internal danger.
Kahn uses his own life as an example to explain this, which is so vulnerable. He writes about suffering a massive, debilitating panic attack in his adult life, simply because he was being evicted from a standard rent-controlled apartment.
A very normal administrative issue.
Right. Consciously, his drawing room mind knew this was just a hassle. He had money. He could just rent another place. But the physical anxiety was blinding. Years later, through his own analysis, he realized the eviction alarm bell was actually tied to his father's sudden death when Kahn was 13 years old.
At 13, his Oedipal rivalry and his adolescent push for autonomy were at their absolute peak. When his father suddenly died, his unconscious primary process mind concluded, "You secretly wished for your father to be gone, and now he is dead. You have committed murder."
And the classic punishment for patricide in ancient myth is exile. So when Kahn received a standard eviction notice decades later, his unconscious equated it with primal exile.
It hit the panic button.
Yes. The bouncer rang the anxiety alarm bell at full volume to keep that ancient, terrifying guilt about his father's death from entering his conscious drawing room.
That is a flawless example of the signal anxiety at work. And when that alarm rings, the ego has an arsenal of tools to fight back. It deploys defense mechanisms to manipulate our perception of reality and protect us from being crushed by that anxiety.
I want to dig into how much energy these defenses take, because Kahn's examples are wild. Take reaction formation.
A classic.
This is where you protect yourself from a forbidden, terrifying feeling by convincing your conscious mind that you feel its exact opposite. Kahn brings up the composer Beethoven.
Yes.
Beethoven harbored an obsessive, vitriolic hatred for his sister-in-law, Johanna. He spent years in court trying to ruin her life and take her child. But biographers and analysts argue that this ferocious, exhausting hatred was actually a massive reaction formation masking a passionate, entirely forbidden sexual love for her.
He had to build a fortress of hatred just to keep the love repressed.
The energy expenditure is staggering. Or consider the counterphobic defense. You fear something deeply in your unconscious, so your conscious mind acts as if you desire it or are fascinated by it to prove you aren't afraid.
Kahn actually admits to his own counterphobic behavior here.
Yeah, he would find himself mesmerized, standing on the streets, staring into the windows of cutlery stores, examining sharp knives and open razors.
Just staring at them.
Right. He was defending against a deeply buried unconscious castration anxiety by feigning an intense intellectual fascination with the very objects of his fear.
And then there is projection. This one feels so relevant to everyday office politics. You repress an unacceptable feeling inside yourself, and instead you become utterly convinced someone else is feeling it toward you.
Oh, Kahn talks about a graduate student named Jay. Jay was constantly furious and stressed, claiming his dissertation committee was secretly conspiring to sabotage his degree and fail him.
But the reality was the committee wasn't sabotaging him at all. They wanted him to pass. Jay was unconsciously sabotaging himself. His father had been a hard-working, blue-collar man who sacrificed everything for Jay to go to school, but tragically died before Jay could finish his degree. Jay was burdened with crushing unconscious guilt about intellectually surpassing his dead father. He secretly wanted to fail so he wouldn't outshine the father he loved and mourned.
But consciously admitting, "I want to destroy my own career," was too painful and absurd for his drawing room mind to accept.
So the bouncer utilized projection.
Jay took his own desire to fail and projected it onto the professors. "I don't want to fail, they want me to fail." It allowed him to feel righteous anger instead of paralyzing guilt.
It is a brilliant, albeit destructive, survival mechanism for the ego.
So what does this all mean? We have strict bouncers in our minds, migrating childhood tribes, internal panic alarms, and elaborate reality-distorting shields. It means that simply existing in an advanced civilization comes with a massive, unavoidable psychological price tag.
This brings us to the profound thesis of Freud's late masterpiece, Civilization and its Discontents. Freud realized that for humans to live together in large groups without tearing each other apart for instant gratification, we couldn't just rely on external police or laws.
Right, the threat of jail isn't enough.
The threat of external punishment wasn't enough to curb the chaotic entrance hall. We had to internalize the authority. We took the judging voices of our parents and the moral rules of our society, and we installed them permanently inside our own heads.
The internal cop.
Yes, this internal cop is what Freud called the superego, and its primary weapon of enforcement is guilt.
And here is the most brutal, tragic twist for you listening right now. Because the unconscious entrance hall operates on primary process, the wish is equivalent to the act.
Which is so unfair.
It's totally unfair. You can be a perfectly law-abiding, polite, highly civilized person. You can pay your taxes, help your neighbors, and do everything right. But you will still suffer immense, inexplicable, silent guilt, and you will punish yourself endlessly, maybe by subtly sabotaging a great relationship or procrastinating until you fail an exam, simply because your unconscious wanted to do something forbidden.
You suffer the very real punishment for the crime you only dreamed of committing. It is the invisible tax we pay for being civilized human beings.
So, to you, listening to this right now, the goal of diving into basic Freud wasn't to diagnose you with a pathology. It was to give you a completely new, illuminating lens on your own life. The next time you inexplicably forget a crucial meeting, or you pick a bizarre fight with your partner over napkins, or you feel a wave of intense anxiety right before you achieve a major success, don't just brush it off as being tired or stressed.
Look deeper.
Yeah, look at your own watchman. Peer into your own entrance hall. There is a deep hidden reason for it.
And this raises an important question, perhaps the most profound philosophical dilemma of psychoanalysis. Freud famously stated that the ultimate goal of his therapy was, where id was, there ego shall be.
Meaning the goal is to make the chaotic unconscious conscious.
Right, to drag the contents of the entrance hall into the well-lit drawing room so we can control them. But we also learned today that this bizarre, illogical primary process, where wishes are reality, where time doesn't exist, and where contradictions thrive, is the exact source of all our art, our poetry, our explosive creativity, and our playfulness.
It's the engine of imagination.
Precisely. So if we actually succeeded, if we somehow became perfectly, transparently self-aware and illuminated every single dark corner of our minds, would we finally cure our neuroses, only to accidentally kill the very spark that makes us beautifully, creatively human?
That is an incredible, unsettling thought to end on. A perfectly clean, flawlessly lit drawing room might just be the most boring place on earth. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the script you're reading from. Embrace a little bit of your own chaos, and we'll see you next time.